Hi, this is Mark Arnold with another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast. And today I have Craig Kausen, who is the head of the Chuck Jones Gallery. And I have, as usual, Kamden Spies, who helps bring me animation-related guests to my show. So welcome both of you to my show.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to meeting your audience.
All right, very good. So I guess to start the show off, I mean, you can introduce and say who you are and how, if you want to lead into how you founded the Chuck Jones Gallery.
Yeah. My name is Craig Kausen. I'm also not only one of the founders of the Chuck Jones Gallery. I'm also one of Chuck's grandsons. So the long story is I kind of got sucked into the family business years ago. And, but along with the Chuck Jones Gallery, we founded the first one I guess was 1992. And they've been all over the place, still have galleries in multiple cities. But the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity was founded in 1999, which is the 501c3 public charity that we run as well. There's also the Chuck Jones Museum. So it's like the entire Chuck Jones universe I get to play in, and on almost a daily basis. So I've been doing it now for, going on 31 years since I've been involved. But I guess my whole life I've been involved with the Chuck Jones family. So it all sort of makes sense at some point.
And then presently, where do you have locations? All these locations you're talking about.
Yeah, so
we interviewed Ben too. We interviewed Ben twice. He liked it so much he came back.
Excellent. Yeah. So go ahead, Kamden.
I was going to ask. So y'all have one in Chicago still?
So the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity is in the Chicagoland area. Ben just moved. He's a board member for the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity. Ben is one of our artists that we publish through the Chuck Jones Galleries as well. But he founded the Chicagoland Center, and then he moved to Florida 2 weeks ago, and he's founding the Central Florida Chuck Jones Center for Creativity down there. So Ben has been a great conduit for the Chuck Jones world as well. And so I'm glad he's been on here to share his world and talk about an enthusiastic guy. So we do have the Chicagoland, we've got Southern California that we're, in fact, this week we're doing the fundraiser for which is the Red Dot 12 fundraiser, where artists donate works of art. Kamden, you've seen it before. I think you've even been there. But this year we have 160 artists who have donated works of art, and they go on, they've been bidding on for about 4 weeks now, and so the event's this Saturday. So we've got that location here in Southern California. The event actually is going to be virtual. Ben will be hosting, along with my mother and my brother, the virtual event on Saturday evening. I will be in person at the artist and sponsor appreciation reception at the Bowers Museum. They have a little, well, not a little, but a side museum called the Kidseum that we're going to host the event at. It's 11,000 square foot space that we're now running programs out of. So we've got that. We've got a gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which we've been there for now 29 years. That's hard to believe that is still going on there at that. We've been in a few locations there. We've got the San Diego Gallery, and then we've got a small gallery space here in Orange County that we operate out of, but we do pop-ups now. We've been in San Francisco. We have 5 years in a row. We've done a pop-up gallery in Palm Desert for the month of January to April. So it just seems to continue to spread. Museum exhibitions. So the third organization is the Chuck Jones Museum. We just had the extension of the Smithsonian tour that we had rolling around the country from 2014 to 2017, where the sites, the Smithsonian exhibits, the extension of that was in Irvine, here in my hometown at Great Park, Irvine, from July to December last year. And so we did programs there, had a pop-up gallery in Irvine at the the spectrum there. So I'm confused just talking about all the spaces, but they seem to be all going on, and more museum exhibitions to come.
Mm-hmm. So you're home based in Irvine then?
I am. I am for many years.
Now, when Chuck was still alive, was he home based there, or where did he live?
So he was up until, let's see, I think he was in Hollywood almost his entire adult life.
Right.
Grew up there as well. Was in production until the 90s. So I had a house up in Hollywood Hills, one of the last houses that my mother grew up in the 50s. He kept that until the 90s. And then when he located down here, he was in Newport Beach and Corona del Mar. And so my grandmother moved down. When we moved back into town in the 60s, she decided to come down and be more of a grandmother to us little kids. And then Chuck came back and forth from LA when he was creating things like the Grinch and Phantom Tollbooth and the Crickets and the Kiplings in the 70s. And so he was both in Hollywood and in Corona del Mar pretty much all the way to the end of his life, and lived in Corona del Mar when he passed away in 2002.
Now, when were you first aware that Chuck Jones was the Chuck Jones?
Well, people do ask me kind of what it was like growing up with him, and nobody really knew that. People knew I knew that he created cartoons, but it didn't really mean anything to anybody. It was just, a grandfather who had a job. He wasn't famous. There was no accolades for any of the guys who worked on the Looney Tunes. It happened to be something that occurred from the 30s to the 60s, and then Warner Brothers shut down the animation studio, and a lot of the guys just went off and retired or went off to other studios, and he started Chuck Jones Productions and started doing his own animation. He decided that he still needed to survive and make a living, and Warner Brothers owned all the characters, so it wasn't like there was royalties that were coming in on anything. So he just decided that he wanted to continue to create. So I think probably when I was maybe a late teenager and people started to recognize that there was something special, and it probably coincided with my mother starting the art business in 1977, around that time, as people were interested in what he had done. And I think, as he was invited more in to do more radio and television interviews, and people became aware that there were people, like Friz Freleng and Chuck and Bob McKimson and Tex Avery and Bob Clampett, who and their teams, that there was a guy named Maurice Noble who created these brilliant backgrounds and the designs, that there are people behind all this artistry. And I think all of a sudden there became a recognition that it was an art form, and which Chuck always believed, but then more and more people came to recognize it, that it was something special, and the things that were being done on television during the 60s and into the 70s were not even close to the same artistic value, and certainly the quality of animation. So I think through people like the writers with Time Magazine and Stephen Camphor and missing a Charles Solomon, a writer for the LA Times, and they started to articulate a lot of the things that they recognized in Chuck's work. So I think I certainly wasn't ahead of the game as far as recognizing that he was something special, but for a long time I was like, as people, so you're related to Chuck Jones? I said, yeah, he's the guy who does Bugs Bunny and those kind of things. Oh, that's interesting. And then, fast forward decades later, and they're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. I'm like, yeah, it was really cool.
Mm-hmm. I think the first time I saw the name Chuck Jones probably was on Looney Tunes, just saying directed by either Chuck or Charles M. Jones, depending on the cartoon. And but the first time I knew him as kind of a separate entity was probably in the 70s, when he was doing like those Ricky Tikki Tavi and the White Seal and those type of specials, and he was kind of doing his own thing.
Yeah, and I think that was when because I wasn't around when he was doing the Looney Tunes. I was born in 1962, and he left Warner Brothers around that time in 62, 63,
Right.
and started Chuck Jones Productions. So I remember a little bit when he was at MGM, but really the animation that I appreciated and grew up with and waited. I never saw it before it was on television, but I thought it was very cool to see the cricket in Times Square, or Rikki Tikki Tavi, or the White Seal, and I don't know if you've ever heard the story, but when Chuck was doing research on the White Seal, and he always did lots of research, and I wasn't experiencing when he did the Rikki Tikki Tavi, but he said that he saw film of cobras at that time, very difficult to see, subtle movements. But there was somebody who had filmed a mongoose, and that at 10,000 frames per minute, and so a very, very high resolution, and that they had determined that one of the reasons why they believed that a mongoose would always, or the cobra, they had this interaction between them, and the cobra made a slight movement backwards before he lunged, which gave the mongoose the opportunity to understand that it was coming and react quickly. And so he put those types of details in there. Now, when it came to the White Seal, my grandmother, Dorothy, I called her Nani, and it was always Nani, Chuck and Nani, never called Chuck Grandpa or anything like that. But we went down to SeaWorld, and Chuck had reached out to SeaWorld to ask if he could come down and study the marine life. And we'd been down there before, but this must have been 8 or 9 years old, and gone down with Chuck and my grandmother and while my grandmother and my brother and I went from show to show, seeing Shamu, or seeing the dolphins, or seeing the seals and sea lions and whatnot, he got behind the scenes access to go and sketch and draw and learn about their movements. And so, and as he learned about sea lions, which is what the White Seal was, it wasn't actually a seal, it was a sea lion. And that one of the differences between a seal and a sea lion is that a sea lion has their knees tucked up underneath them, and so they're basically, when they move, they're up on their knees, whereas a seal is a flat and really doesn't ever get on their knees, and they just kind of wobble around there. But as he knew from studying early on, that every mammal has basically the same skeletal structure, and almost all of the same bones are in a sea lion that are in a human. We each have an ulna and a tibia and a humerus and femurs, and that if you look at them, they're just different lengths and they're different positions, but all mammals are basically the same structurally. And so he had a theory that and the reason that they move the way they do, sea lions, is they're constrained within all that blubber, and their arms are inside, and the flippers are out here, but inside they're trying to move the same way. And so he had a theory that if you constrained a human the same way that a sea lion was constrained, that the human would have to move and swim and move on land the same way. And so Chuck was great with theories, but he loved testing his theories. And so at the age of, I was 10 and my brother was 11, he brought us down to his house in Chronomar with my grandmother, and he came down on the weekends to visit. And he decided to test out his theory by taking us and putting fins on us, and putting fins on our hands, and tying our elbows to our body, tying our knees and ankles together, and then throwing us in the pool. And to
drown.
Yeah, exactly. And so, fortunately, we were already very good swimmers, and we're on swim teams. So we figured out very quickly how we needed to move, and it turns out that it was very similar to the way that a dolphin or a sea lion moves through the water. And so he sketched little doodles of us swimming and whatnot, and there are still some photos somewhere of that experience in that pool. But that to me was one of the times where I thought, okay, maybe my grandfather is not quite the same as every other grandfather. When he's
Now-
very thoughtful, and he's also got a great sense of humor.
Now,
Greg,
when he was making these shows or later stuff, did you actually go into the studio and watch like maybe a storyboard meeting or anything over the years?
No. Kamden, did you have a question?
Sorry.
but let answer Mark's first.
Okay, all right. So while I was growing up, I never got there wasn't any opportunity, because as they were in production, they were just there every day going through the process. And we were in school, my mom was raising 3 kids, it just wasn't a thing. But I remember when he was doing the Curiosity Shop for ABC television, when he became the vice president of children's programming, or I guess executive vice president of children's programming at ABC in the early 70s. Curiosity Shop was a live action weekly show that came on Saturday mornings that had a weekly element of animation that he got to bring to it. And it really was about, now I look back and kind of think it was sort of a precursor to the ideas of the Center for Creativity, that curiosity is everything, and that if you're venturing into new ideas, that you're stimulating your creativity. So we got to go up one time to visit the cast and see the set where they did all the filming and meet the crew. And I think the most famous, and I can't remember her name, but I believe that she was the voice of I think she was Sally on the.
I know who you're talking about, Mark. She was also on Star Trek, I think.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it's Pamela Ferdin, and she was the voice of Lucy.
Lucy,
that's what it was. Some of the Peanut specials.
That's what it was. So she was, and early in to meet her, and then there were other guys that were there. She was sort of one of the older kids, and so they had fun with, within the Curiosity Shop. You don't go down the pole because they had a fireman pole there that they go up the pole, and so they'd slide down and they reverse the film and then show them going up the pole back to their sort of hideout area. And that lasted about 1.5 years until Chuck, because he had about 20 minutes of animation every week that was part of the storytelling, because there was this old television on the set that they would then interact with. And he came to realize that 20 minutes, even 10 minutes of weekly animation was just impossible. That to do it in the quality that he was used to doing, he couldn't keep up. And so even though they did make it more simple and the characters were individual and the backgrounds were not complex, to animate characters in the way that he wanted to, he just couldn't do it. And so after about 1.5 years, he said, I don't think this has got legs on it. It did very well from what I understand, but I can't find those films anywhere. All the masters and whatnot must have disappeared.
I'll tell you, Craig, my friend Tim Hollis, who owns a cartoon museum here in Birmingham, he has 2 copies of 2 prints that he sent me. I can get copies of those. Love
to see them again, because I've heard some audio things that were recorded, but they were more just sound effects, but none of the actual things. That's great.
There are 2 episodes that exist now still, and he sent me copies of them. I can get you copies as well.
Great. That would be
more than happy to send you a DVD of them.
Thank you.
I'd love to see them too, actually. Because I used to watch it.
Yeah. Craig, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
So I've been wanting to ask you this, and Mark, I put some even note for these. So I was re-looking at Curtis Finley's book, and I know you were the model of this guy right here, who I have the print of.
Yeah. So
I was going to ask you about that, because from your perspective about being the model for Crawford.
Yeah, there it is. I tell you. Well, so I tell you the story that I knew Crawford certainly growing up. I knew of cartoons. I knew of his drawings. I knew of the comic strip version of it. And in so I mean, I love the drawing, I love the gags. My brother actually was showcased in one of the strips.
Yeah, this is one.
The Frisbee.
I'm actually interviewing Todd shortly for an article for Cartoon Research about the Pogo special.
Great. Yes. Well, he was instrumental in that as well. And he got to go on the production set with Ward Kimball and those guys. So I was always jealous of that whole thing. But he made that. So I knew that it existed. I loved the gags. It was sort of Chuck again, so much work being put in to do a daily strip. He said that was one of the most challenging things he ever did. And so I always appreciated it. But fast forward to the year 2010. So Chuck has been gone for 8 years now. And we had the opportunity at times to go through archives and there was a couple of letters that were written to my great-grandmother, his mother, from the early 70s, talking about when he was hired on to ABC for the children's programming, and a note at the bottom. And he wrote many handwritten letters, to his mother, to others. He was a great letter writer. And so I was reading through this, and it was just sort of what was going on, and what he was happening in Hollywood and whatnot, and the studio. And now that at the very end, it said, and now I'm being hired on. I'm excited about being the executive vice president of children's programming, and I think I may just be able to get my beloved Crawford animated, who is patterned after my grandson Craig. And I stopped and I read it again, and I called my mother and I said, now I'm reading this letter to Nana. That was what I called my great-grandmother, and she called her grandmother. And it says down here that he is going to get to do Crawford, and it's patterned after me. And she goes, well, of course it is. Didn't you know that? And I had no idea that until that moment that this, sort of, I don't know if it's absent-minded or just curious or, always getting into trouble, had no idea it was patterned after me. And so that literally was the time. So I never had the opportunity to ask Chuck, why Crawford was inspired by what I was as a little kid growing up in the 60s. So anyway, so hopefully that answers your question, that I have no idea what it was like being the model of Crawford, because I had no idea I was the model of Crawford.
Did you act differently than your...
Oh, sorry. All, though?
Go ahead. Say it again, Kamden.
Chuck ever talk about Crawford at all, though, when you were with him?
Well, I mean, he always talked about the fun of these characters and what, in some respect, I kind of look at the way that it wasn't mischievous. It was just life and the opportunities to play around with things in life that Chuck saw funny. And so, and the way that the sister interacted with Crawford, and the way that his friends and the dog and all of the characters in there, and looking back, it was sort of, what was Crawford about? It was about nothing. It was just about funny parts of life. And if you take it in that vein, it was sort of the original Seinfeld, that it was just life and looking at amusing anecdotes, and it happened to be based around these children and what things they got into. So he talked about the fun of the characters. I think more than anything, he talked about the difficulty of every day seeing that page stare at you, and that you had a deadline to do every single day. And once again, it lasted about 1.5 years before he just went, wow, and he met some wonderful people there, and he was he was an honorary member of the Cartoonist Society, and he knew people like Herb Block and Mike Peters and many of those guys that did political cartoons and editorial things as well. So, he appreciated what they did, and it was his way to sort of play in that medium. But I think after a while, he figured out that if he wasn't going to be able to animate, maybe he could bring it to life in comic strip.
Now, I forgot. You say you had siblings as well?
I do. I have an older brother and a younger sister.
Okay. Did they make their way into this strip at all, or Why
only
the focus?
Todd. I mean, only my brother Todd, who there. Camden knows the strip where my brother was a discus thrower in high school, a very accomplished one, and so Chuck brought in the idea of Crawford beating Todd Kausen's record in the discus throw, and then the punchline is that it's not a discus, it's a frisbee that he threw. And so, but I do remember that Chuck reached out to what is it? Who is it? Hasbro or the Frisbee company who owned the brand?
Oh, Whammo.
Whammo, is that who it was?
Yeah,
okay.
Whammo.
And that they said, you know, certainly use it in there, but you need to refer to it as a Frisbee disc because the Frisbee can't become generic. And I still remember I was probably 15 years old. And the distinction between you know, a Frisbee and a Frisbee disc and with a trademark and everything else that had to go along with it. So
I was going to ask Todd this when I interviewed him because I actually have a picture. I scanned it from the book. Would that make Todd the only member of your family that's been name dropped in a Chuck Jones production?
I would say that's probably true. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I can't remember any reference to any of us. I will say that there is a reference to my mother in Phantom Tollbooth, and not by name, but by birthday.
Interesting.
You remember the scene, Kamden?
No.
Yeah, so
I have no idea what your mom's birthday is. So
I know, but the reference to a birthday in Phantom Tollbooth is when Officer Shortshrift comes rolling into the car and you know, and he's yelling guilty, 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 and he asks Milo when he's there, you know, he pulls out his pad and he's writing down things. Where were you on July 25th? And he goes, I don't know. I don't know where I was on July 25th. And he goes, you know, why? And he goes, that's my birthday. And so he took my mom's birthday and put it in there. So we always thought that was very fun. That was what, 1970 or 71. So it was, I always thought of my mother that he did that.
Speaking of birthdays, the Pogo special, I'm going to bring that up again. That was based on Todd saying something about a family birthday. And y'all said that, and for a while, I think that y'all's family celebrate that. Do you still celebrate a family birthday?
No, it was fairly short-lived, and I think you know, when the family gets so big that there's so many birthdays as it is, but it was a concept that everybody had their birthday, and he said, why don't we have a family birthday? And Chuck sort of, that was a little like a spark of inspiration that Chuck kind of ran with and decided that there was some legs there. And so they discussed it some more, and Todd can tell you the details because I wasn't a part of that. I didn't get invited to anything. I didn't get the $100 that he made. I didn't get anything. So not that I'm bitter to this day. Yeah, and he'll remember exactly. He said, I could have sworn it was $100. He might say it was $50 as a royalty for the usage of it. But yes, and I saw a picture of him, and I'm sure he can find that for you, of him sitting with Chuck and Walt Kelly in his, you know, Brooks Brothers suit, you know, because every 8-year-old needs a Brooks Brothers suit to go to Hollywood, you know. But yeah, he, I mean, being the eldest, he was smarter than the rest of us, maybe. So,
and what's interesting though is the bottom of, I'm writing an article for part 2 of Cartoon Research about the special, which I'm gonna be honest, and I was honest, and I told Linda this, I'm like, this is definitely not one of Chuck Jones's best works because it just didn't match Kelly's style right, I don't think.
Yeah, okay.
But it has a very charming story to it, and that's why you like it. It has a very charming origin to it. I think that's why people like it. But so like I did, the part 1 was like this interview with Chuck Jones, and then another interview with Jim Foray with the special. And part 2 is all about Todd and the whole thing.
Nice.
And at the bottom of one of the articles from '69 that I'm reprinting for it, it says, it's like this, like, it sounds like a Superman news flash. It says, could the family birthday replace Christmas and Easter? Could it replace the regular birthday? Could it devolve our actual need for presents? We'll only have to wait until find out. And then, like, it's like, come back soon next week to see.
That's awesome. Well, I don't remember much of that interaction. I remember I actually enjoyed the special quite a bit, and obviously it was not right on model of Walt Kelly's, but if you look at the history of what Chuck did with books and with two-dimensional static characters, he evolved them into his own always. Right. And so he couldn't just animate what others did in a static fashion. Right. How the Grinch Stole Christmas was a classic example of that, and that he had to evolve things into his own style. And so Dr. Seuss was not nearly involved in How the Grinch Stole Christmas. He was more involved in Horton Hears a Who, and then as he brought in other directors on his other books and films, obviously things evolved to be more like the book. But Chuck could take a story, envision it in his mind, and then create that in what he saw. And so obviously if you read the book Rikki Tikki Tavi or the Kipling classics and the stories, that you have your own vision of it, but Chuck had the ability to now bring it to life with his characters. So it doesn't surprise me that it's not on model as far as Pogo.
I was going to ask though, also, Kipling, they adapted the Jungle Book, Mowgli's Brothers, which I think is like the sequel to the Jungle Book, the first book. I don't know much about Kipling. So
yeah. So
didn't Kipling's family? I read somewhere that Kipling's family liked it better than the Disney version.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, Chuck wanted to honor the author and the meaning of a writing, and so he was a voracious reader and read everything, and so appreciated the written word and what the writer was attempting to communicate. And so that visual interpretation, first of all, it was Mowgli. So, and because obviously Disney had pronounced it Mowgli, and that really took a lot of license for the story when they did their Jungle Book. And I've read and heard that Disney specifically told all of the writers and all of the animators not to read the book by Kipling, that do not, this is our story, it's our interpretation, it's our stuff, so don't even read it. Whereas when Chuck came around and found classic stories by great writers like Kipling, he decided that he wanted to do it justice, and so he actually reached out to Kipling's granddaughter, if I remember the story correctly. The timing would have been about right. And she was in England, and called her and said, so I want to know, I've always pronounced it Mowgli. And obviously, is it Mowgli or Mowgli? And this British Chuck, I remember Chuck talking about this. He said, I'm on the phone, and this deep, British accent, it is Mowgli. I hate Walter Disney.
Wow.
He sort of just went, okay, so we're going to do this justice. And so Mowgli's Brothers was born, and Chuck, through his love of animals and his research, and certainly he wanted to give this story, the human was humanized, and the animals were not humanized. They acted, and they although they spoke, they communicated, that they ran and they walked and they acted like animals. And he thought that was the way that he believed that Kipling would want this to be done. And so, and the White Seal, you know, one of the greatest pieces of animation that I know of. And then when we got to Rikki-Tikki-Tavi, and you know, they each had their classic moments. So yes, Mowgli's Brothers was very different, and Chuck, you know, wanted to honor Kipling and the family.
I have a question. Did Chuck ever resent going back to the Looney Tunes after doing all those specials? Because you know, it seems like after he did all those specials and kind of doing his own thing, then he was doing things like Connecticut Rabbit in King Arthur's Court and Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie, things like that. Did he consider that like a few steps back, or was he fine to take on new Looney Tunes work?
Oh, he loved doing the Looney Tunes. I mean,
Okay.
you know, his I think he would have wanted to continue to animate the Looney Tunes throughout the entire time. You know, when the Short Subject Studio shut down in the early 60s, obviously it was time for him to go on and do other things, and really there were a few things being done at Seven Arts, but that was if you look at those Looney Tunes cartoons, they were very different than the originals. So and the budgets changed so much, you know, that it was no one was paying for a Short Subject animated special the way that Chuck needed to have his crew paid to create such quality animation. And so it was only in the 70s that and I think it really has to do when animation fell off the cliff. Disney fell off the cliff in animation in the late 60s and early 70s, and everybody figured that maybe animation was done. And you know, Chuck really put a lot of effort into keeping quality animation as an art form alive in the 70s by doing these television specials, and you know, that you could, and it would take him nearly a year to do these animated specials of 23 minutes. And so nobody else was doing that. Almost everybody else was doing, you know, weekly half an hour specials that, you know, certainly didn't look the same. And so for him to get the opportunity by going back to Warner Brothers, and my mother starting the art business and reaching out to Warner Brothers about artwork and, you know, production art and whatnot, because the inquiries were starting to come in, people appreciating that it was an art form, that there was an opportunity to create new content. Now, you couldn't create a movie for the budget, so of course they would have to take the classic cartoons, rebundle them, and do bridge work with the new animation there. And so he was able to create that. So the Looney Tunes characters, as he always said, they were like his children. And so when he was not able to use them, it was like being cut off from your children from an extended period of time. And the art world gave him that conduit as well to go back and start to play with the characters in, you know, pencil and in watercolor and in oil painting and other ways, so that he got to take these children that he had that came from him and see what they would do in static, you know, ideas or scenes. You know, it's not just the cartoons, it's what would they do in this situation. He always thought that was the fun part, is to write again. So yes, he was thrilled to be able to do production with the Looney Tunes again and put together a team of people who could animate. Many of his team from before were gone come the 70s and the 80s. But and then in the 90s, he got the opportunity one more time to go and do Chuck Jones film productions from 93 to 97 and create 6 short subjects. And they were just starting to roll through with these young animators and young directors to create that magic that they had, you know, sort of be left alone and let them be creative and to do these short subjects. And Warner Brothers once again couldn't figure out what to do with them, and you know, they're expensive to make when you do it in that quality. And so they shut down the studio again, and that's when Chuck sort of really focused on more again on the art, and that was, he was just about done until he did Timberwolf, which was his only digital platform that some of the guys from Chuck Jones Film Productions came back and did. But yeah, he loved working with Looney Tunes.
Cool.
I have a question. So I know that other than Chuck, I know that very early on, I think a little bit later, but earlier on, Linda and Ruth Clampett shared Frizz a bit back and forth. They happily shared Frizz because I know they both worked together. I know Frizz but I know that besides Chuck, I know with Frizz, when did y'all start working with other characters outside of the Looney Tunes the gallery did?
Yeah. So I mean, to begin with, my mother was the only publisher in town, and
right.
then it really started it and continued to grow it through the gallery network. And Ruth came in later and started to publish her father's things. And then when the Warner Brothers studio stores came to be in the early 90s, about 93, because my mother's, the production company without the galleries, she was selling to galleries all over the world.
Right.
And she was just creating the Chuck Jones artwork. She was creating artwork for Bob Clampett's family. She was creating things for Friz Freeling's family and putting a few other artists. Mike Peters was being represented with us, the cartoonist, Mother Goose and Grimm, Kathy Geiswhite from the Kathy cartoon strip, comic strip. So it was feeding more and more in there. And then when the studio stores came in, they ended up hiring Ruth to do quality control and art development for the studio stores. And so then we became a production house for the Looney Tunes characters for the Warner Brothers studio stores. And then we continued to have relationships with other galleries throughout the world with the non-Looney Tunes artwork. And so then in, I think it was 2001 or 2002, we were, in 1993, one of the things that we were able to do with our new relationship with Warner Brothers was to open galleries. And that was really the impetus to open the first Chuck Jones gallery, was that they were taking over the relationships with the galleries for the artwork. And we were then with the opportunity to produce the artwork, but what other ways could we provide Chuck's art outside of the studio stores, which I'll be honest, I never thought was the appropriate place for all that artwork. And it was not an art gallery. It was a merchandise store, and the art galleries were the right place for Chuck's artwork and the other, fine art that was being created. So we got the opportunity to open our own galleries, our own Chuck Jones galleries, and develop those. So our first one was in Corona Mar. And then in 1993, we opened the Santa Fe Gallery. And then in 1996, we opened up the San Diego Gallery. And then the short-lived San Francisco Gallery opened in 97 and closed in 98. And beautiful space. But
I remember that. I was living there at the time.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it was a little bit like having a fourth child, and just there are too many hands to deal with, and so it just got cumbersome. So we decided to, really focus on the three, and so that was how we got, and it was purely Chuck and a few other artists like Frizz and whatnot that we continued to represent some things from. But then in about 2001, because we'd been doing it for a number of years, we had a lot of collectors who asked, why don't you bring in Disney and Peanuts and other, studios that we would love to collect, and we love to collect with you. So, you're the guys who seem to care about us the most in a gallery setting. And so we started relationships with other publishers and people who had licenses with other properties, and started to bring that in. And then when it came to Looney Tunes, the studio stores went away in the late 90s. And so that was fine. I mean, then we started in the early 2000s bringing on other artists doing Looney Tunes, things. John Alvin was one of the first ones. He was the movie poster artist that did E.T. and Blazing Saddles and whatnot. And he was a fine artist extraordinaire. And so we met him and represented his work from about 2001 to 2008. And he was really starting to flourish. And other artists were coming into the stable of artists that we were representing. So that's how it just continued to evolve over the years, that people and artists would approach us, I love Looney Tunes, can I play with those characters? And sure, yeah, let's do that. And so now we've got a couple handfuls of artists that we're regularly doing artwork with and offering it to all of the galleries, and hoping to continue that expression of Looney Tunes and Chuck's legacy, and the artists that we're supporting are, like Ben, are having a great time.
You guys still sell artwork to other galleries too?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. There's not nearly as many as there were when we had 150 galleries in 1992 that we were selling to all around the world. But there's handfuls of galleries around the country and North America and Australia that we continue to do business with. Yeah.
So I ask, in the early days of the gallery, did Chuck himself do any participation, or did he just lend his name and say, take care of it?
Well, I mean, he certainly was not in any sort of the functional way, and he wasn't in the art business. He was never participatory in the business side of things. His business was creating cartoons, and he was an artist creating imagery and fine art. And then my mother was always the one who took it, created the business model, created the business flow, took care of all of that. When the gallery started, he was more than willing to come and do appearances, which is what it was, and provide artwork for the collectors who wanted it. And so we did many events at the Colonel Marr Gallery, at the Laguna Beach Gallery, at the San Diego Gallery. He even appeared a couple times in San Francisco. And the reason that we actually opened up Santa Fe, New Mexico as a gallery, one, it was a logical thing because it was the highest density art market as far as the number of galleries in a square mile range than anywhere else in the country. Wow. And secondly, and probably more importantly, it's a place that Chuck loved to go. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It has an incredible opera. And so he would travel out there regularly anyway. So we decided, well, if he's going to be there, let's open a gallery so that when he goes out, we can do an event and he can appear. And so it happened for many years, starting in 1993. And in fact, in December of 93, we opened the gallery, I think in June of 93, and established it. And then I think we opened in September, but we had the major grand opening in December of 1993. And the weather was so cold that it was in the teens. And we had a second story gallery on Palace Avenue. It's sort of a block off the plaza there. And so it's probably 15 or 17 degrees outside. And no one in Santa Fe had ever experienced anything like an animation art gallery before. It was all Southwest and Native American, and I had so many naysayers that it'll never work in Santa Fe. That's not what people look for. And so we planned and marketed the grand opening, and so I was with Chuck. He was over at one of the hotels nearby, and it was so cold that they sent a car to get him, and we got in it was a town car, a limousine, but brought him over to the gallery, which is only 2 blocks away. And we had to, there was an elevator that was around back. And as we drove up, the line from the second story came around the area on the top, went down the stairs, and then down the street, probably 2 blocks. And the gallery was already full. So they were regulating. It was only a 1,000 square foot gallery upstairs. And it was sort of our tiptoe, put our toe into the water in Santa Fe. And we had somewhere on the order of 1,200 people show up for that grand opening. And they stood in line. And it was supposed to be a 2-hour event. And there was the mayor was there, and a shaman came to bless the thing, and it was just a wonderful event. And after 2 hours, the staff came over, and I was kind of worried. I mean, Chuck was 81 at the time, I guess, or yeah, he just turned 81, and you're at 7,000 feet elevation, and I don't want to overtax him, and he came out to wave at people a couple times, just sort of came out and said thank you to people for waiting. And after 2 hours, there were still hundreds of people in line. And he had met hundreds of people already. And we said, it is time to go. I mean, the show is over. And he said, are there still people outside in the freezing cold? And he said, yes. Well, if they can wait out there in the freezing cold, I can wait in here until I meet them. And so for like 4.5 hours, he sat there until all the people got the opportunity to come in and meet him and take a photograph and get their artwork, dedicated and all that kind of thing, take a picture. And so, I figured after that grand opening, we had something good, but that was his participation in the gallery that, had his name on it, and that we were able to really showcase his fine art. And it wasn't just Looney Tunes, there was his fine art and the other things that he loved to create.
Yeah, I know that y'all sell all sorts of different art. In fact, I'm sitting right next to 2 Hanna-Barbera cells, a Bullwinkle cell, and then we're in a Popeye cell up there that I got from the Chuck Jones Gallery.
Yeah, so it is a massive diversity of things, and sort of the rule is that if it makes you smile, makes you laugh, inspires you to have a memory that you like of a film or a cartoon or a character that you love, then we would like to represent that. We would love to be able to provide that, and so it has continued to be special things like you've just described that we're able to put into the gallery, and our licenses evolved as well. So to begin with, we were Chuck Jones Looney Tunes, and then many years later we were Looney Tunes with other artists, and then just a number of years ago we've been able to add like Hanna-Barbera, and we just added the Jetsons, we added Space Jam, we added even the new Space Jam to it. We haven't done any artwork with that yet, but we have the license to do it. We've
I don't know why you want either Space Jam.
What's that?
I don't know why you want either Space Jam.
Well, there are people who are looking for that, and I was asked by a few artists. I haven't seen either of the films, so I can't really comment on it.
Good for you, Craig.
Yeah, but we've got Christmas Story, we've got Elf, we've got there's some Batman. There's some Batman original Justice League, 60s and 70s cartoons that we've got, and so. If it's fun through Warner Brothers to be able to have our artists dabble in those things. So there's always an evolution. So it's very fun.
So I guess that kind of answers a question I have, but I'll ask it anyway. Is like, are you just at this point just trying to continue to acquire new and very different licenses that you haven't had before? And just kind of go where the market takes it. Like if you see that such and such character is really popular, why not pursue that license? Is that how you kind of operate?
It's not so much that I'm pursuing other licenses. Warner Brothers is interested in allowing us to play, and many of our artists want to be able to play. If you love the Looney Tunes, it's likely you'll love the Hanna-Barbera characters. And so the artists certainly do enjoy playing with those characters. The other ones kind of came along as opportunities when we're able to create those things. And I think, things like Disney, other art publishers have those licenses, and the Simpsons and those other characters. We can work with them to provide that, but I'm not interested or pursuing other licenses that I would need to maintain. It's a lot of work to maintain licenses and do all that kind of thing. And our history is really the core Looney Tunes, and that's really where I think my passion, and certainly the passion of most of our artists, are based around. And it's certainly the history and the reference material that we have best on how to honor Chuck and his past and his contributions.
Was Chuck starting to do Grinch art though right away as well when he did the Looney Tunes limited editions?
No, it took us a while. It was actually in the 90s that we got the license for the Grinch. That took a long time because there were a lot of people involved in the Grinch, because the film was done by MGM, that was acquired by Warner Brothers later, and then Dr. Seuss Enterprises still had rights for the characters, and so there were many parties involved to come up with a license that would work for everyone. So it really wasn't until the 90s that we started, and I think it was 91 or 92 that we really started being able to do that with the Grinch.
How about Tom and Jerry? Do you do anything with Tom and Jerry? As
a matter of fact, the Tom and Jerry is part of our license, and that is a fun one. I think more adolescents, that are now in their teens, know Chuck for Tom and Jerry because Warner Brothers put out the Chuck Jones Tom and Jerry collection on Blu-ray, and they know that even more than they do the Looney Tunes. So it is those are fun characters to play with as well.
Yeah. Well, Kamden, I don't have anything else to ask. Do you have anything else to ask, really?
Nope.
Yeah.
Well, it's a pleasure. I tell you what, you guys are great. Good questions, both of you. And as you can hopefully tell, I enjoy talking about Chuck and what we do with the family of companies. So I know it's taken a long time for me to be able to find this slot, but I would love to do it again. I think I'll be Ben, and I'll have to come back.
Okay, maybe we could have you both on at the same time. I don't know.
That would probably blow up the stratosphere, but I would love that.
So how we usually end the show is, we've talked about throughout the show, but I mean, if you want to plug anything and just, repeat where the galleries are,
sure.
What exhibits are coming up and what to look forward to if you're going to the Chuck Jones Gallery.
That sounds great. I mean, thank you for allowing me to talk about the family of companies. I mean, the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity continues to bring programs to the world, and I encourage anybody to go to chuckjonescenter.org to find out either how to get involved or just finding out what we do with the community. As I said, every year we have a red dot auction where artists donate artwork and then they're auctioned off to raise funds to perpetuate that. The Chuck Jones Museum is in the process of finding venues for future exhibitions, and we started very successfully the Smithsonian almost a decade ago, and continue to evolve, and we're actually in the process of, we created a virtual gallery, and I'll send you links for it, that we've got a virtual reality version of the last Irvine, and it's under corridor.com/Chuck Jones. There is an actual the replica of that, and you can go into the virtual reality and see what that exhibit's about, and see videos on the walls and whatnot. So that is I'm sorry?
What service is it? I'm asking because there are two VR stations at my college that I go to.
Yeah.
They're like two VR rooms where you can go in. It's like a gaming. It's like a game that you can do it.
So these are, you can put on an Oculus headset now and go in here and experience it. You can experience it on your device or your computer. Corridor, CORRIDAR.com/Chuck Jones, and that has the virtual galleries, but at the very end there's an Irvine exhibition that is there. And so, and that's really the next stage of what we're doing. We're in the process of creating virtual reality galleries, because I know the experience is so important in a gallery realm. And actually in August, we're going to do our second NFT drop of Chuck Jones artwork that'll be out there in digital version that can be experienced in a virtual world. And we still have the galleries in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and San Diego, and the pop-ups that we do. So chuckjones.com or chuckjonescenter.org are the place to find all the happenings that are going on at the gallery or the nonprofits.
Very good. Well, it was a pleasure having you on the show, Craig.
Thank you,
have you back.
Thank you, Kamden. Good to see you. And I look forward to next time. I'll be glad to, I'll coordinate with Ben. You know, now that he's in Florida, we'll be bi-coastal and we'll cover the country. That'd be great. All right.
All right. And that wraps it up for another episode of the Fun Ideas Podcast. This is Mark Arnold, and join us next time.